Hello.
Hello?
I will begin. Yeah, I'll just do it like that. Okay. Cool. Um, yeah. So as far as like general intros and updates and things like that, I know we're gonna try to get to this paper today. I don't remember if we actually finished this paper last time or not. Did we? We were like at the very end or something, or did we actually get through it?
We finished it. I mean, we didn't talk about the last section that much, but I don't have anything else to say.
Okay, I'll look at this last bit and then we can dive into this. I have a few other I have a couple things to say. Like I have a few updates. Like number one, oh, like it's been a I feel good now, but it's been like just getting us into like grad school and doing it and doing like the midterm. Um I did not get to progress. I've actually I, I have thought quite a bit about like the manifesto and the Beyond Person Studies project. I don't have anything great to say about it right now. But it's there's been work there, um, and I've been thinking about Cognition Future specifically and all that stuff too. But I don't really have anything really fancy to say. There's something that came up um, that I will talk a little bit about ahead. But the main thing, but there's something I want to discuss here because there was sort of something that came up in the statistics course that I'm taking, and I'm pretty sure nobody cares about the perspective I want to bring to it. So I made like a discussion post in the class, and I'm pretty sure nobody's gonna care about it. But I just want to review some of that here because I think it's kind of relevant to our talk or
Yeah.
our broader aims, and kind of related to phenomenology too, even like the Verla phenomenology quest. But mostly, I'm just I had a really tough 2.5 weeks that kind of concluded last week. And so now it's kind of, it feels like it's a normal, it's been like a decent Monday and a decent Tuesday and like a decent Wednesday. It's like, okay, like I think I'm kind of on solid ground again. So that's basically my general update. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything here for update stuff. Um, but let me kind of keep rolling along.
Yeah, I don't have any real updates.
Okay. I did see your other papers in the like. I don't know if they were all 11 papers or not, but like the reading group stuff you posted for the like potential ideas for the future. That would look pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I was watching a talk from Levin, um, and it was there was a lot of overlap with all the other talks of his that I've listened to is on his YouTube channel. Um, and that was one of the slides, that screenshot. It was like he gestured
Oh,
towards
nice.
how there could be interesting philosophical uh, issues that his work touches on. But that was not the topic of the talk. So he was basically like, so here are all the papers I've written that are more philosophical. Um, yeah. So if I feel like we've gone over some of these in maybe Saturday morning.
We've talked about
But
some of the stuff like tame and
yeah,
and stuff.
but yeah.
Oh,
So we can
yeah.
check in about this tomorrow. But some of these might be good to continue
Oops.
because it's very like I can't name another like person or another like type of work that is so like cybernetic. um so it'd be interesting to like I don't want to just turn that reading group into a Michael Levin reading group, but um a lot of his stuff is really relevant. So
I'm honestly really intrigued by the potential. Like it's been an unstated question for a long time. Is like in our reimagining cybernetics project or otherwise, where is the link to kind of cybernetic stuff and like Levin? And I don't know how much Amanda you know about Adam Saffron. Um,
A little.
he's done a lot of work trying to combine different theories of consciousness and make his own stuff, and he's an interesting fellow. And I believe Levin. Oh, he Levin and Adam were co like editors or organizers or something. I believe for the Royal Society paper that we got in recent last time
Yeah.
with Bradley and the embryo and De Gordon, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the, Saffron and Levin have collaborated on a few things, and there was some discussion about a certain project, and I kind of um, there was a path things could have gone down, and I'm not sure what and if it will go down something that I saw a little bit of insight into. As much as I can really say about it right now, but I guess I'm quite curious about I don't know. It's legitimately I don't. I'm not necessarily saying yeah. Let's turn to the Mike Levin reading group, but I'm really curious to investigate parts of it at least, and I think that slide that you posted is going to be relevant to it because and for a few reasons. One, because of the topics as it is, and secondly, because I think I think it'll just be easy for me to pull this up. Like the whole Levin, all this website and the research stuff, but then the very end, which I mentioned before, this whole thing, um, morphogenesis, diverse intelligence, et cetera, and then the end thing about, um, like, I'm really curious about how some of this philosophy and think it's in the ethics as it talks here, but basically, you know, implications for evolutionary biology, but also biology, biology, and development of ethical and social frameworks that would be essential in the future as the forms of agents around us diversify far beyond what's currently imaginable. Like, I think I don't really, I have nothing that comes to mind with like Michael Levin ethics talk. Like, I don't really know what that is. Um, and I'm not suggesting he needs to do that at all. But I, between we just came from human use of human beings, which is cybernetic related, and some of Levin's work pushing in a cybernetic direction is like, I could definitely see Michael Levin rewriting a version of human use of human beings like 10 years from now or something. Because I know he wants to do a lot of things in a very particular space, and he's doing a whole crap ton of research all the time, as we know. And like, I don't think he's going to sit down and write some public opinion, public science book. But um, I wouldn't be surprised if something that way comes ahead. Anyhow, um, that's cool. To keep it rolling along, I guess I'll just, unless any other things people want to say for intro stuff, um, I will dive into my little update. Also, I don't know if anybody wanted to talk about ISPSM stuff. Um, I have nothing particularly fun to show right now, but I'm really going to put it on myself to have something kind of. I'd like to try to talk about it Saturday. I know we didn't meet last week Saturday. I had a whole. I think Saturday was in the midst of my midterm stuff. Saturday and Sunday was like. So, but I think we didn't have a meeting at all. So, if we're doing that this Saturday, I might want to talk about it then. I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
talk about it, Amanda, but
I don't. No, I don't have anything worth sharing right now.
okay. There we go. Put that
Yeah.
Hashtag it's already here, but it's not actually. So That's that's a safe thought, but we know it's a very um, it's what we tell ourselves, but we know we don't have the time. Like we got to do it now. So yeah. Um, so my little bit of a new item, and I I'm gonna put a time limit on myself for this. Um, I'm gonna give myself a 10-minute time limit, just because I'm gonna go over it, and then I'm gonna aim for like 15 minutes, but we'll go for it. Here we go. The course is statistics, like an intro statistics course, but it's from the data science perspective. And a few weeks ago, in the discussion, there's a discussion group part of it, and we talked about the Monty Hall problem. Monty Hall problem is sort of the classic game show thing where, oh, we have three doors and behind is a new car, but pick one of them. You get one choice and then you get two loser choices, right? And so the person picks one choice, and then the question is, oh, okay, we're going to take away one of the choices. So now it's, do you want to keep your original choice, or do you want to pick a new, the other choice, that now there's only two choices remaining? And according to data science and statistics, it's always good to pick the next problem. It's always good to say yes and pick the choice, because um, you've gained more information about the entire problem set, and therefore it's a more informed choice and it's better off. And because there's there's a like, I'll show this quickly, but no, we're not going to play that. There's sort of like the thing where, you know, oh my god, two ads, YouTube ads have been,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. There's sort of the thing where, you know, what if you had 100? What if you had a choice between one out of 100 doors? You pick one, and then, oh, well, we're gonna say all these other 98 doors. We're gonna take them off the table, because it's because it's you are now have 100 points of data, and we're gonna make 98% of them. 98 of them are, what would it be? 97 of them are irrelevant, and now you have to choose between this one or that one. And it's saying that the increased information now makes the awareness of the second choice better. That's kind of what it's getting at. I'm really sloppily explaining it. I apologize. But what was interesting to me about this was, I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of the the way to approach statistics is kind of what I'm calling kind of the statistics perspective. And I wrote a post in here, and I'm not going to go through the whole post, but just to remind myself, I made a discussion post this week because I was going to talk about that last time when it happened, and it didn't happen. But we talked a little bit about like the null hypothesis this week, and there was some discussion when it was happening about, like, oh well, um, like in someone's culture, a professor used the example of, well, null hypothesis is basically like, kind of like innocence until proven guilty, or in the sense of saying, here's a I didn't really like how some of it was explained, but it was a sense of null hypothesis as not having a, an impact, or a significant relationship of the cause and effect there, versus the alternate hypothesis. So innocent until proven guilty. And someone immediately was like, "Oh, well, my country is actually the opposite way. So my country, it's guilty until proven innocent, or like the way the law is structured, you have to do it the other way around." And I looked at this sort of, between this discussion and something about like all these different examples that were similar, and it was sort of like, well, what we're getting at in a statistics perspective, um, and also, well, is less about applying. It reminded me a little bit of the Richard Sutton bit in Bitter Lesson, Well, it's about applying the human level specific framework and understanding statistically or mathematically what is the structure and functioning of the questions. And it kind of creates a very interesting objective take on it. But it also, the statistics and mathematics of things are simply more about what are the, what is the sample? What are the data points being considered and how does it change? And applying it to these human problems is a little can be messy and murky. So how do you do that? And suffice to say, um, you know, going back to the to go back to the Monty Hall problem for a bit, what originally kind of got me about it was, isn't it in actuality, in a real sense, if you know the game show, you know what's happening. Isn't the Monty Hall problem actually just a question of yes or no, stay or go? They're going to reduce the choices, so it's not really a three question situation. You're not really gaining information in a certain perspective. It's just going to be the choice is always going to be stay or go, right? But that's because you know what the course is and you have previous knowledge. You know how it's going to go, and so it was kind of this discussion about what is that and what do you do with that. It's particularly interesting, I would say, even in the context of data science, because data science and what we're kind of learning in the coursework, although maybe not explicitly said yet, is sort of you are at the mesh point of deciding, okay, here's the math and statistics, and what is the structure? I would say objectively, I'll say a little bit in quotes, but a little bit of a nod to Valerian on subjectivity. At least, like, what is just the structure of the problem, the dynamic, the statistics, and what are those rules, and how do you set that up? Versus the mesh point between human experience or cultural relevance, or what even in trying to explain, like when the professor was trying to explain innocent until proven guilty, it was sort of like it kind of makes sense from an American point of view to use that to explain null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. But like it kind of gets at the dilemma of what cultural knowledge are you using to explain even just the basic structure, even just you have to kind of try the sort of almost second person y or intermediary thing to make it click to you internally. And so I lightly touched upon some of that in what I was writing about here, in a very, very simple but boring and nerdy way for the class. But what was interesting about it was sort of like, I think spending more time in the statistics course, and going through this and setting it up in a very, really getting kind of forced into this space of what does the mathematics say? What does the statistics say on the objective, or I think, I mean, in better words, like the abstract logic of these situations versus connecting it to, in a pedagogical sense, the personal experience and the culturally relevant experience that kind of makes it have some kind of affectivity internally almost. Like it connects with you in some way. And then creating sort of the implementation or tool like thing of saying, okay, here is this structure, and I'm kind of trying to point to this abstract structure and going from abstract structure to wielding it in an everyday life situation. So you can determine, what like why is trying to arrange your p-value in this way going to result in more or less information. I kind of went into even a little bit of like trying to determine signal and noise, or like trying to, depending on how you're scoping things, you get more or less almost salience. And just like, how do you do that and why do those choices matter? Because in a mathematical sense, you are able to, here's what you do, but there's sort of the normative component of why does finding this level of confidence. I'm very much a novice in statistics, and I'm kind of trying to tease apart. I mentioned the professor, And I'm on time. I was under 10 minutes for that. I'm pretty proud of that. I was trying to tease apart with a professor, like, hey, like I'm really interested in like philosophy of science and stuff too. And there it's cool because there's a learning component in the course about people trying to make like learning materials and like optimistic that things may go in a way we get to talk about this more. I don't know. I'm learning how to really I think statistics and I think data science may be a really particularly interesting lens that I didn't think about in the sense of what is it worth, regardless of context, and even like a statistics person, learn training the lens of that viewpoint of like just totally abstract um, math, not applied, and then getting to really applied, and the mesh point of like applying or being applied and like decoding how it's applied. Um, so I don't know. That's just on my mind, and I will um, we don't have to talk about it, but I think there's a space for something like that in the future of the project too. I don't have any questions or comments, but we can move on after that.
Yeah. So I had a few comments. So number one, the Monty Hall problem is a lot more like controversial than it looks. I mean, that's people have always considered that like there's an answer to the Monty Hall problem that most people don't get because it's not intuitive. And then when you walk through it, it's like, well, you could think about it in different ways. But like so, there's always like that sort of aspect to it where on the surface you can explain it in terms of probabilities, but then people ask questions and it's kind of like there are a lot of questions that arise from that simple way you set that problem up. So that's number one. And I just remember when I was introduced to the Monty Hall problem, I remember that same sort of process where I had to, and I was always amazed at like how sort of many different takes people had on it. So that's interesting. Number two, yeah, it doesn't depend on how you set your problem up. I think a lot of times we think about numbers as being, just numbers that we generate out of magical boxes or magical things. Like, you can measure something with a ruler, but the ruler itself has, a history behind it and sort of a set of assumptions behind the measures. And there's a whole field of mathematics or, uh, you know, measure theory that goes along that at the very deep roots of it come from there. So I think it's kind of cool how I like to talk about those kind of things. We should think about those things more. I think they're interesting. Definitely linking them back to like hardcore analysis, though, not just saying, well, numbers are just made up because that's not really an answer to anything. You know. So yeah, what were you gonna say?
Reminded me a lot of the stuff in the FQXI questions and like the I forget what they would actually call like unexplainability and stuff before, and like measure. They had one about measuring things too. I don't know if we did that or not. I forget, but
Oh yeah.
it kind of, and again, like I I I should probably maybe disclaim more. Like I understand in the course I'm taking is not about philosophy of science. Someone mentioned the TA mentioned it as a simple way to get you to think about the assumptions of um, problems and whatnot. Yeah, I'm not trying to you know make it look bad and how it was brought up. But yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. And please continue.
Oh well, yeah. That was my second point. Then my third point is that someone from this kind of perspective, or maybe a philosophy of science perspective, someone should look at some of the bioinformatics papers that have come out in the last maybe 15 years or 20 years, because those have a lot of interesting like you have this new sort of way of dealing with data. You have like massive amounts of data for the first time. There's really no methodology. I think early a lot of early neuroimaging papers are kind of like this too, where there's no real methodology for like analysis, or maybe even sometimes like coming up with quantitative metrics. Like that, for example, you need to you might have like numbers that come out of a machine, but beyond that, how do you make sense of it, or how do you even start to put that into a framework? And so people in those papers had to kind of bring frameworks together from different places. So they were borrowing from statistical physics, from, statistics, from computational biology, where that didn't exist yet. So probably computer science, from mathematics. And they're trying to pull these things together into some set of techniques or methods. And people still do this, but it's kind of like it reached its zenith maybe about 10 to 15 years ago. So, going back to those papers, it'd be interesting to see how kind of people like really, I don't want to say pulled things out of their ass, but they had to do like some improvisational, something we don't associate with quantitative research. Um, and sometimes you read the papers and it's like you have to spend a long time figuring out what they're doing. And I think part of that is because, that was just kind of something that was improvisation. I like that you got ass out of that and put it in the notion. So,
I was gonna draw first time ever this amazing. Well, it was a very fun lecture on the same. I want to go back to this point, but since Amanda put out the ask, I was already going to say this anecdote. Like an econ course a long time ago I took. I was like, sometimes like people justify things in economics in very strange ways, and it drew this like squiggly line, like kind of like a W. I'm like, so how do people get their ideas? And he put like this line from the W, so like this W, and they drew this line like an arrow out. It's like, yep, they pulled it right out their back pocket. Like they just pull it right out of their back pocket. This is like, okay. It was this very funny moment of this kind of serious guy. He was really serious until the point that he like made this joke, and everybody realized, okay, he's kind of cool to make jokes. So it was a fun way of like getting about economics explanation, things like that. But yes, and I wonder, I'm having in mind, since I'm still my background, my background of the CBMM 10 anniversary is still present. I see myself on the screen when I look at my other monitor. Um, what's that? That's so funny. It reminds me of CBMM when they were kind of talking about neuroscience and like, oh yeah, like there was a big burst of stuff like a while ago and things like it here. And I'm wondering, I don't know if it's related, I know it's like biology related, but between that, the specific mention of that time frame, and also like this sort of in 10, they were the research panel was talking a bit about, okay, we want to go to like neuroscience for analytical frameworks and things like that. But it almost feels like with what you were saying, and this is a stretch made completely in dark out of ignorance. Jeez. Correct this because I don't think this is right. It almost feels like what you're kind of suggesting is, you know, um, the bioinformatics stuff needs some philosophy of science. There could be some, they're still looking to make some methodology, but still looking for some better ways of analysis, even in that space. And even though there was kind of this, from the perspective voice at that event in the panel, there's kind of a deference to, oh well we can still use this in neuroscience. Do you think there's sort of they're both of the comments are pointing, what you said and what they said are pointing at the same problem for need of development in that area? Yeah. Or do you think there's a development that hasn't been understood by one of the other parties? Or I don't know if that
Oh
makes
yeah,
sense.
I think well, I mean, a lot of times, when you come up with new methods and techniques, people have to understand why they're valid or they have to be validated. But sometimes they're fine, and it's just that, like, they're new and people are a little confused by them and that. There are also, there are people worked out problems that are similar to yours in other fields, so you can borrow from other fields instead of inventing your own thing. It's like, just basically not reinventing the wheel and, just applying something. But if we apply something directly, say from statistical mechanics or from like mathematics, we have to be careful that we're not just, copying and not thinking about our own problem and in particular what we're actually trying to do. So it's like we have these, like in statistical mechanics, for example, you have people think about things in terms of particles, or they have this very atomistic view of the phenomena that they're talking about. So, people have complained, like, for example, about agent based models or about other types of models, computational models of humans and human societies as being very atomistic. In other words, it captures some of the basic aspects of like interactions, some of the basic aspects of, what we might, how you might if you put numbers on people and track them, and but they don't really include things like cognition and other types of things that influence maybe decision making. So if I built a uh, agent-based model of a city and I wanted to look at like uh, class stratification in a city and residential segregation, I could do that, and I could run like a model that was specialized for like pattern formation or something like that, and I could just simply apply that framework to my problem and map it from the problem to that model. But the problem, of course, is that people will immediately say, well, people don't make decisions based on like abstract, rules, or they don't make problems based on this problem. They make decisions for a number of reasons. There's a lot of, heterogeneity there. So, I mean, I don't know which answer is right. I tend to favor like making the application of, say, physics models, but you have to understand how they're useful, what the limits are of them, and why they give the answer they do. And especially when you're dealing with a new area, like if you were to build cognitive models of the same phenomenon, you would have to understand kind of what you're doing, what you're applying, what the assumptions are, and then especially making a connection with the physics models. How do these models differ? How do they link together? And are they really modeling a thing that you're trying in the real world that you're trying to understand? And that's always an issue with models, but even more so when you're applying new techniques and you're quantifying things that in many cases can be quantified in a number of different ways. So, I can't say like if I quantify something, that's the best possible way to quantify that thing. There could be other ways that are better. If I just, picked, if I said I was going to represent Jesse by his movement every day, his movements from place to place, I could describe your movement patterns, and that's about all I could describe. Maybe I could glean like what time of day you like to go pick up food, or what you're basically doing, where you're going to work or school or whatever. But I can't necessarily say any more than that. So, measures have their own value depending on what the measure is, and so there's a lot of thought that goes behind into that. So I think there's something there. I don't, other than just kind of those basic things. I don't know what the research questions would be, but we should follow up on this. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's for a moment. Just calling a manifesto project right now because I don't know. I don't. I'm kind of moving on from person studies to an extent, although person studies still very is something very specific to me. But for that discussion, I feel like I think there's something uh I think there's something about philosophy, history, and science, the type of topic we had just now. Um, there's definitely something in that space, and it is kind of tied to reimagining cybernetics, or almost feels like reimagining cybernetics is almost like a not to say a subset, but like an applied. I think there's a way to think about reimagining cybernetics in its light somewhat. I'm not saying we have to. It's just I think there's something definitely something in this space that I do want to continue to flesh out more because I feel like and we like even a lot of what we just talked about. So I'm pointing out my screen, I'll use my cursor to show. A lot we just talked about sort of like which models. And I really like the point brother just made about um, just because you quantify something doesn't mean that act of quantification um, encapsulates all of the requisite, or even it doesn't mean it has the right meaning or the right amount of meaning or whatever. Like, yeah, like the example of me, um, of my movement data, my GPS data, or whatever, or like my like I have like the aura ring, and it's sort of like uh, there's new like a new daytime stress setting. It's like, oh, as you're moving through your day, you would see more stress at this point,
Right.
which is like based off of like my heart rate and like some of my activity and stuff like that. And it's sort of like you see this really interesting movement towards even like health tech or biotech, but you see this really interesting movement of being able to um, quantify. And this goes back to kind of maybe what we hope to do, hopefully with the headbands, and like getting this new forms of feedback, but we don't have. There's a lot of choices to be made, and what do the data mean, and also like the even not even in a sense of not even what, but maybe uh, I don't know if epistemic humility really applies here, but more like quantificate, like when you are choosing to quantify humility or at least sobriety around what meaning is assigned to the quantification. Uh,
Where were they talking? I couldn't remember uh, how they were talking about this at CBMM. Do you remember that discussion more?
Basically, CBMM. It wasn't exactly about this, but I mentioned CBMM as kind of this is kind of in the vein of being out on neuroscience, like part of the AI research panel was essentially kind of saying the future of AI really doesn't necessarily depend on studying the brain any further. And we kind of compared and contrasted this to what Pika said. But I think there was at the same time, there was a definite sense neuroscience really can help us. Let's actually, let me, oh, come on. Oh, let us, it was about, where did it go? Here we go. Sorry, this is quite slow. There's a definite sense that neuroscience could help in terms of assisting with the framework of things. Oh, geez, it really bums me out. I don't have this here. Was it 60?
May have been.
Or was it one before? Because it was the one where I had like, I think it might have been a little bit after that. I'm just trying to, sorry. I want to find the specific slide because I know There it is. Yeah. Okay, great. Like Thomas Poggio offered this very specific this like like just because I want to be fair to CBMM because one person, Demis, the AlphaFold and everything else he does, he was kind of saying, hey, like neuroscience and AI is not actually going to help us do AI research, but there's still discussion like it's relevant because we need uh, fundamental principles. And Poggio's slide here was basically saying, we need Demis was basically saying we need analysis techniques and frameworks for analysis. We don't have it. We're developing quantification, we're getting data, we're being able to do a lot. And we have kind of developing these sort of methods, but we don't have analysis for it. So we're kind of looking for AI. We're looking why I mentioned this here, is that there was definitely a sense we need new theories. We need theories of meta learning. We don't necessarily need physics level precision. We need something kind of precise. But we need to ask better questions and may require more theory. Stuff like this. I think there's more here, but it's not showing up. But yeah, so just like that. That was I'm oversharing for that, but yeah.
Yeah.
This was 41. Okay.
All right.
We can move on. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah. Amanda, did you have anything to say, or do you want to add something?
Well, I guess one thing that's related that I've been thinking about, specifically regarding like EEG data, is so we have all these ways of quantifying things, but there are just so many steps where like sets of assumptions have to come in, like from like how the instrument that like how the electrodes work all the way up to like after processing, like when you start to use these more sophisticated analysis tools that are supposed to like maybe solve some of these issues, like there's a different like nonlinear measures that are in theory trying to capture like the meaningful numbers, um trying to they like capture the patterns. But even those methods, like what you're analyzing, if the numbers that are coming out of the machine the literal machine is like the data acquisition device, there are assumptions that go into the building that and how that works. So um, yeah, that was just what I was thinking about when you were talking about this like request for analysis. It's like and it's not just like a big data kind of thing, like, well, oh, we have all these numbers and if we find the right algorithm we can make sense of them. It's like probably like there's so much variation across like the particular experiments with whatever, in whatever kind of science. um like every day like every run of the data acquisition device will be like potentially a little different. And it's like how if that makes its way into this data set, then if that type of variability remains, then it's hard to imagine what kinds of analysis tools would successfully like take that noise out and extract the signal. So
I think there's a really natural way to go into like a very critical, skeptical position of um, all these things about like bias in data sets and not just not just bias, but also this kind of variation. I'm reminded a bit of
Yeah, it's weird to say bias in this case because it's the variation is like it's due to um real variation in the world.
Yeah, I meant like bias in data set in general. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, there are
but
different
yes,
forms
I
of
agree. I
bias.
agree what you're
Yeah.
saying. Isn't it's more than bias too? Like it's not just a bias. It's like structurally the 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 non-objectivity of the third person approach, in that it is actually a different, as much as we'd like it to be the same, like the universe is not the same as it was, and you can't recopy it and hold everything static and just change the constant, you know, in that sense, yeah. Is there like a fancier term than data acquisition, like error?
Um,
'Cause I'm sure there is. I just know.
yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, let's just use that.
Okay, cool. I know we're kind of taking a long time in this, but I think this is cool stuff, and like I think actually quite they were kind of this even what Amanda said here is like this is super related to super related even if from the other side in that like we're kind of and it's kind of exciting because I'm getting to I I actually I had a conversation where I was explaining a different it will get to that. I was talking about a different this is a note to myself for a second. I was in a different conversation talking about a lot of things in terms of trying to diagnose stuff. And I happened into Varela and saying, yeah, like I really loosely mentioned Varela saying, Varela is kind of trying to get to a place where we can bring some, you know, uh, I don't want to say objectivity, but some more rigorous data for interpersonal experiences. We don't have a way to measure that. And it's like I'm working on some models for a whole bunch of things and it came to this way. And I feel like, you know, a lot of what we talk about here is relevant to the methods project specifically. I know a lot of the framing we're doing lately is much bigger picture stuff right now, but to the methods project specifically, we are trying to find out this, you know, from the inside out right now, what can we do to connect a little more, I don't know, rigorously that way. And I don't know. Cognitive science, cognition futures methods project is relevant to this. You know, fill in the blank. Um, my mind's a bit slow right now. I apologize. Anything else you want to say about this? This is I really like. I'm really happy this discussion. I'm very happy this discussion came up. I'm not surprised knowing us, but like I was hoping that by bringing this up, it would kind of dip into this, and it did. So that was fun. Um, anything else before we go into deep dive? So
No.
okay. Let's do one momentary pass on this last thing. I, I, I may be totally wrong, but let me just look at this. I'd like to close this paper with an appeal of sorts. Instead of increasingly juggling between old conceptual dichotomies, I think Varela himself, this is Navarro's paper, by the way,
Yeah.
um, something Varela himself was strongly averse to do. So he was averse to, what is he? Averse to increasingly juggling between old conceptual dichotomies. Okay, so a sense of a nod of Varela trying to be progressive, moving past the dichotomies. Why not devote ourselves to wholeheartedly to articulating both conceptually and terminologically the non-dual or co-specifying spirit of the style of the new thought styles Varela was trying to forge. I don't pretend to have a good, let alone final solution to this question, nor was this, as mentioned in your presentation, the purpose of this paper, but perhaps something along the lines of Ouroboros, interesting, chiasmic? Like,
Chiasmic?
Chiasmic, yeah.
like, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means.
I'm not sure. Ouroboros means it's like circular and it doesn't have an end.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this didn't help out.
Chiasmic is probably
Like chimeric, like a blend,
no.
crossing or decussation.
Well, no. It says
Uh,
what is chiasmic? What is the meaning of the word chiasmic?
a reversal in the order of words in two otherwise parallel phrases. So I think it's kind of also Ouroboros, I guess.
Well, no. It's where you have these like oppositions between two things, like whereas Ouroboros is circular causality. Chiasmic would be where you have a chasm between two things. You make a distinction between two things. You pull them apart, or you reverse the phrases. I'm not really sure what he means in this case, like how you would do that.
Okay, Ouroboros. So I think he's trying to get at. I like Ouroboros a lot, like something in the sense of differences within a whole system. Maybe is a way to think about it. Like there's a something, maybe a start and an end, or a this and a that, but there's still shifting that perspective. Whatnot. I don't know. Note that this is not merely a matter of sticking a label to what is already there, which I think is an interesting remark and related to some. That reminds me of some of the things Fuchs was talking about or criticizing, I guess. Fully formed and articulated. Instead, it's more akin to evocation or an opening of a new field, although perhaps tacitly present, gets often overlooked and is devoid of clear elucidation. In other words, it is a call to articulate and then explore the new trinity that Varlas is referring to. Neurophenomenology, to my eyes, is but a temporary resting place, a mixture where what is needed is a compound, and we should
I
try
like
to expand the spirit that is permeating it. Do you want to say why you like that?
that. I guess just after reading this paper, I thought the articulation of this like non-dual space was interesting because I think um, that just like explained why I find certain things interesting. I think like I guess cybernetics and the part about like formalization being an important step in this. And why I like logic. I don't know. So like neurophenomenology, the way we've been talking about it, it's like you have the first personal side and then the third personal side, first personal and third personal. Um, and that would be seeing it as a mixture. You have two things that you need to mix together properly, but then a compound where it's like one substance that has like these two features. I guess it reminds me of the dual aspectivity discussion. Like instead of seeing the mind body problem as you have mind and body and it's how do you link the two, that's the framing is wrong. You have one thing and it has these two aspects. I think this metaphor really brings that out.
Man, I think I cut off somewhere in the middle of that. I don't know, just it's being weird for us or just me or whatever, but I got like the last sentence of that and the very start of it. I don't know if you can re-say that or not. I'm sorry.
I guess I think I summarized it at the end. I like the metaphor because it reminds me of the dual aspectivity kind of reframing of the hard problem. Like instead of starting with you have these two things and how do we mix them together?
Yeah.
It's you start with one thing and look at its two types of properties.
And I think I like this. I didn't know. I didn't recall what this paragraph said, but what I like about it is basically getting at just that in the sense of oops, in the sense of basically being like, this is when I started writing that blog, when I wrote the first part of the blog post is basically about this. It's basically all about what this is doing, what Amanda said, in the sense of where I wanted to go with it was here in the sense of um, I think what we're coming across on many fronts, whether we were just talking about um, even the EG stuff a little bit, the FQXI related talk, the statistics talk, the money, things, the highest aspirations of why I brought up the Monty Hall problem and the null hypothesis stuff, and talking about it in that class is sort of like there are these different facets and points of where current theory has its obvious kind of limits. And like we have a certain, I don't want to say two-dimensional. We have an x, n dimensions, and we're kind of like, okay, what about n plus one or n plus two dimensions of analysis here? Or like what is a what if we incorporated a different level of integration across dimensions to actually try to explain the phenomenon again? And I think cognition futures and neurophenomenologies is very specific. It's very kind of, I don't want to say tip of the spear because I think and even in social sciences like intersectionality or critical theory books like that, like it's not just that, or even just to do this again like chaos, the new science, and the books about like it's not just cognition futures. I think it's just on these different fields, like where is that space and what can we push against it? And it's a bit something about how this was written here is sort of like not just thinking only what's there, articulated work, but instead worked in opening a new field, although tacitly present, gets overlooked and is devoid of clear elucidation. Like I think that sums it up pretty well in the sense that there's stuff there, it's just really hard to articulate in a sense because the inertia of existing, I don't want to say dogmas and the weird like that, but like existing ways of referencing things is really strong and not necessarily bad. It's just like a natural outgrowth of development, and it's kind of this going against the grain is inherently hard across all these different fields. So yes, that's that's my reaction to that, and I like the mixture and compound too. Um, Finally, the spirit is either naturalist or transcendentalist. Transcendentalist, if you prefer to see the cup as half full. It can be both, particularly in the dialectical sense. The in-betweenness or non-duality of the spirit should not be seen as a flaw, but rather as its main strength and be consequently and consistently treated as such. So yeah, and I think I didn't talk about this because I thought it was gonna be cool, but I think there's something there. So that's nice. Any final thoughts on that before we go after?
Yeah, that is a bit like what we were talking about. Well, we talk about Kuhnian revolutions and things like that, but that's another view of it is that it's not so much you need a revolution; it's that you need to have that things are kind of new ideas or new approaches are sort of not easy to articulate, and so people would not necessarily adopt something that's not easy to articulate. I mean, there are a lot of ideas that become like someone proposes them and they become very hot, and then they die off after a while. And that's actually a different problem where, maybe these things aren't well understood, but people like the idea. There's something about it that they like. And it could be maybe aesthetic even, which is kind of scary to think about, but not surprising. But so your older ideas are more established. They have like kind of connections to the literature. People have used them for a while. New ideas, of course, don't, and they have this sort of vagueness that, of course, it has vagueness because you have to spend 20 years working on it to get it to the point of a new theory that can be widely adopted. So I think it's an interesting sort of comparison with Kuhnian revolutions.
That'll be a fun thing to discuss too.
Yeah.
And like, in a way, yes, you articulated something that is exactly on my mind, in the sense of we even have an existing framework. Like, even like I'm less comfortable. I'm not really good to talk about either Karl Popper or Korean Revolution, but like the ways in which um, the ways in which we even understand that right now is sort of part of that, and it's sort of like this, like we've been talking about. Oh, like what happened at the foundation of the scientific revolution stuff, and it's sort of like really being able to really trying to earnestly take a hold of the developments that take place, understand the path dependency, and I want to say more than path dependency. I want like path dependency, and it's maybe not subsequent, but like associated path dependency, and there's also like the wake, the inertial context of the path, and then like everything else that kind of comes with it, and how that affects things. If there's anything that I would love to study, is essentially that across all domains. Like what I'm talking about here across, because there's because to me why it's so fascinating is another tangent is like there's an impossibility of communication across those gaps in certain ways unless certain things are totally understood. I'm fascinated. We can't see my background, but I'm fascinated with these spaces where there's contextual things that are totally trumping information transmission or data or understanding or knowing what to do or even like emotional incentives on a person. Why? What is it? Like the invisible wall or whatever. Anyway, I'll digress and we'll turn to that later. But exactly like um, I forgot what I was saying before that other tangent, but yeah, really interesting stuff. Um, any other comments from this last round of things? Okay. I'm glad we came back to look at that. That was a fun. I really,
Yeah,
this
me
is an
too.
interesting thing, but this discussion is important. You say?
I just said me too. I'm glad we went back to that.
Okay. Well, let's finally put Mr. I think it's Mr. Boros. Sebastian Boros. Here we go. Um, we're definitely not going to get through this paper knowing us today. What I wanted to do, because I read some of it and I read a lot of it like 2 weeks ago or a while ago, and it's really not clicking in my framework. What I would like to do is read the abstract and then read the conclusion and then discuss, like, then start discussion because I need to. The conclusion is not very long. I don't know how much people have read the paper or not. I know it's a little bit chunky, but like I
I
think
I wasn't able to read it super closely, so I'd be okay with
yeah.
abstract conclusion and then working through it.
And then there was a cool part where like the author responded to some stuff at the end too.
Yeah, I didn't have time to look at any of that.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. But that looks. I remember. I always love when there's like. I think maybe a really cool future thing would be like we have uh, we get these instances where like you have what happened in cognitive science, which is this huge, to be dramatic, like slap in the face to this field of study. You get people saying, "Oh no, here's our 10 review points saying, well, actually, we think you're wrong." Like I feel like those are interesting points of discussion when you get like actual feedback in a meaningful way that's you know articulated and not quite a debate or lie, but like I think that's I could see I could see honestly like a thing in the future being more responses, like more like things that embody the discussion as opposed to just a point, because you kind of have you have to kind of make a point in the paper, but everybody knows that is the just like our discussion about all this up here about quantifying or really, you have to make the point, and that's not everything. So I feel like the feedback can capture that. So that's cool. Anyway,
This might actually benefit from. I might be able to give a talk, and I'm putting myself on the hook here, but talking about neural coding in more detail. So, like, I might do a presentation on that because I think part of the thing is you have to have an establishment of what neural coding is, and like, sort of maybe the I don't. Well, I can come up with something, but that might be a good way to like kind of get
get
into
in.
this area because it's kind of hard to know if you're not like thinking about it in a framework. Like, it's just a lot of history of neuroscience and things like that too. So
I've kind of read most, like, the introduction was pretty good. And I like what he's getting at with kind of saying coding as it has been used. Like this is kind of a good paragraph. I'll try to make this a little bit bigger. So this seems quite small for some reason. This is a preview of things, but like these three elements, and maybe even I don't know if you agree with this or not. We'll get to this. These three elements, correspondence, representation, and causality of like encoding and decoding, constitute the conceptual scaffold of the neural coding metaphor. It can be argued most technical work on neural coding uses only the first technical sense, as in correspondence, where the word code is a synonym for correlate. Uh, and it kind of goes on. But it says the goal of this article is to demonstrate the quote fully applies to the neural coding metaphor where scope is a particular theory of brain function implied by the conceptual structure of the metaphor. We'll unpack that, but I guess to read the abstract, neural coding is a little bit bigger for the sake of right now. Is it just me, or maybe it's the screen that I'm using? It makes things kind of look small usually. Here, I'll do this. There we go. That's a little bit better. Neurocoding is a popular metaphor in neuroscience, where the objective properties of the world, the objectives properties, are communicated to the brain in the form of spikes. Here I argue that this metaphor is often inappropriate and misleading. Opportunity for jokes, and I'll make a self-deprecating one. First, when neurons are said to encode experimental parameters, the neural code depends on the experimental details that are not carried by the coding variable, e.g. the spike count. Thus, the representational power of the neural codes is much more limited than generally implied. Second, neural codes carry information only by reference to things with known meaning. In contrast, perceptual systems must build information from relations between sensory signals and actions, forming an internal model. Neural codes are inadequate for this purpose because they are unstructured and therefore unable to represent relations. Third, coding variables are observables tied to the temporality of experiments, where spikes are timed actions that mediate couplings in a distributed dynamical system. The coding metaphor tries to fit the dynamic, circular, and distributed causal structure of the brain into a linear chain of transformations between observables. But the two causal structures are incongruent. I conclude that the neural coding metaphor cannot provide a valid basis for theories of brain function because it is incompatible with the causal structure of the brain and the representational requirements of cognition. That's the introduction, or the abstract. Any hot takes on that? as I get to the conclusion.
I mean, it's a hot take in and of itself. So, I mean, I guess he's, pointing out that like people use this approach and it isn't really that. I guess I see in there that it has sort of a connection to behaviorism. So, like in behavior, with some of the references from about the mid 20th century. So, if you're doing behavior, if you're a behaviorist, neurocoding maybe makes more sense. But actually, it would be interesting is to go through some of these comments because that's a really kind of like I see Charles Gallistel has a comment in here on something. It's like turtles, which is the yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested to see some of the things in here that are. Well, this is Shannon's information theory, so this is kind of yeah. So I mean,
I didn't
yeah.
understand how many of them these responses there are here.
Oh, there are a lot. There are probably a lot, but we kind of going through sampling them, and maybe that's what I'll do in a presentation to sample some of these responses too, and bring them in, so we can like kind of think about this.
I'm actually really happy to have. These look really fun. Like this is a whole bunch of perspectives we're going to get to look at.
Yeah, yeah. It's usually they're pretty long. They solicit comments. This is the brain in behavioral science model, behavioral brain science. This has been their model for years, where they solicit these comments from different people and they respond, and the author responds, and yeah, it's really cool.
Okay, well then, I mean, in the last we have like 15 minutes. We can probably just go through the conclusion just to kind of set the stage for our discussion next time. Conclusion. When I say hard as a pump, well, I don't know if you want me to read through this whole thing or just talk about it, or
Well, let's see, how much time do we have? Well, 15 minutes. So yeah, why don't you just go through a little bit of it and see how far we get.
Let's see what he's getting at. When I say the heart is a pump, I propose a function for the heart to circulate. Oh, I was listening to this on Speechify, and it had the weirdest pronunciation for no reason. I propose a function for the heart to circulate the blood. It was so weird. I heard blood. It was great. The blood and mechanisms by which the blood is circulated. I propose specific ways in which the elements of the heart interact by identification with elements of the pump. In effect, the pump is a model of the heart. A metaphor is not simply words arbitrarily chosen to designate the object. It's a model of the object, like Goff and Johnson. And it serves scrutiny, as does any other model in science. Is code a good metaphor of the brain function? Also, great paper for my ISPSM stuff. So thank you. I think, Amanda, you found this one. Or was it Bradley? I don't remember, but thank you. This is all like stuff I'm going to talk about too. There are three aspects to the coding metaphor: correspondence, representation, causality. Talked about that a bit. Technical results are based on the first aspect, but their interpretation and claimed significance draw on the other two aspects, so representation and causality, which are not subject to the same scrutiny. Many neural coding theories rely on the idea that the brain manipulates neural representations of stimulus properties in the variable of neural code, as if the variable in neural code were a processor register that the brain can store, retrieve, and combine arbitrarily while knowing what the variable refers to. But what is the evidence that such neural representations exist? And what is the evidence the brain can manipulate spikes in this way? Technically, it's found that the activity of many neurons varies with a stimulus parameter, but also with a sensory, behavioral, and cognitive context. Neurons are also active in the absence of any particular stimulus. The tight correspondence between stimulus and property and neural activity only exists highly concentrated experimental situations. Thus, neural codes have less representational power than generally claimed or implied. Talks about behavioral significance is making by implicit linking proposition teller that relates to coding variables and behavior, which takes the form of a decoder. The decoder, often ideal observer, is a hypothetical abstract construct whose biological basis is unspecified and whose existence is unquestioned.
That reminded
Even,
me of Fuchs.
yeah. Do you want to say any more?
Um, well, at one point, I think Fuchs talks about like the homunculus issue. Um, but mm, yeah, I don't know. I have to think about it more. I'm trying to remember Fuchs's language that I liked, but he talks about like maybe I'm thinking of another author too. But like representations are representations for someone. Um,
That reminds me super of Johann also.
uh, yeah, and so I think I'm also thinking of Johann, but I'm also thinking of how Fuchs argues that you have to talk about the person and not the brain, because the brain on its own, you like run into this kind of homunculus problem. Here, the homunculus would be this hypothetical abstract construct.
And I think this also ties to sort of this. This discussion is super relevant to what we were saying before, in the sense of, I think Verla would jump in and say, "Yeah, we're kind of assuming it's just this view from nowhere that is decoding this thing." And it's like, well, more in objective science in general, but yeah. Often an ideal observable is a hypothetical abstract contract, unspecified, existing specified, and then a decoder must incorporate key contextual aspects, including methodological details of the experiment, something Amanda commented earlier, which defines the coding variables. Critically, the contextual dependence of neural codes cannot be solved by incorporating contextual variables in the broader neural code, because the context is precisely what defines the variables. The perceptual scene cannot be fully defined as a vector of the properties. Properties of what? Any comments before we go on? The notion of information implied by coding metaphor is inappropriate in understanding the perception and behavior, because it is information by reference to external symbols. A more appropriate notion is information as organization, namely relations between sensory signals and actions, forming the structured internal model. The relation between unstructured models of the world and neural activity is unclear. But what is clear is that no neural coding theory proposed so far seems adequate, even in principle. Ultimately, neural coding metaphor is a way to think about the brain that is disconnected from its causal structure. The brain is a dynamical system coupled to the environment, and is itself composed of coupled dynamical systems, neurons, whose interaction is mediated by spikes, which are timed events. The dualistic structure of the metaphor cuts through this organization, the coding metaphor, and decides that one part of the brain can be understood independently of the way it interacts with the rest of the brain, independently of the way the brain interacts with the world. More fundamentally, a causal role is attributed to coding variables. But this is incoherent because coding variables are extended measurements of activities linked to temporality experiments. They're not causal variables of an underlying dynamical system. In conclusion, the causal structure of neural coding metaphor is incongruent with the causal structure of the brain. If neural coding has no causal power, then they cannot form a valid basis of a theory of brain function. So this is his critique of the metaphor. And then he offers something else. Any other comments?
I feel like that says pretty eloquently what I was trying to say earlier about how even if we like, you can't look at a like big data set that has come from, you know, thousands, a million experiments. You have to like consider the contextual differences that are kind of like impossible to tease apart.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
So this is like an argument, I guess, like in favor of the existence of these contextual differences that are particularly difficult to deal with, like in analysis.
What else if not coding in the few minutes we have left to start this? The coding metaphor, since the coding metaphor is so ingrained, so much inertia in neuroscience, how could it be possible to abandon it? What could it be replaced with? That's the big question for some of these. First, there's no simple substitute for that there is no simple substitute for neurocoding does not make it a viable option. What? Meaning, just because it's not easy to find doesn't mean the thing that's broken doesn't work, I guess. I don't know.
Like just because this is the dominant paradigm and there's not an alternative right now, that's not itself an argument in favor of this paradigm.
Right, yes.
It could just as easily be an argument that we need more creative science.
Hashtag Jesse complaining about we just don't have the models. The neurocoding metaphor is attractive, partly because it resonates with Cartesian philosophies pointed out by Kaiser. I have to check out whatever this is. Whoops, I don't really want to go there right now, but we'll go back to that later. Whoops, oh no, I hope I don't.
Just go up a little bit.
What's that?
Well, you have to go up. Yeah, you can go back.
I can't quite. It's not going to take me back. I have to go like this way. Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And partly because it seems to fit with the computational view of the mind. Hey, yeah, the idea that cognition is the manipulation of symbols, etc. We know what that is. But the symbols provided are neurocodes and not context-free. They are unstructured and no causal power. They do not have the quality required by the computational view. Thus, the appeal of the neurocoding metaphor is illusory. Even if it were possible to map the brain activity to computational description, neural codes would not provide adequate mapping. Similar arguments have been made against the idea of a genetic code or genetic program and the alternative route to adopt a systemic approach. The brain or system is more accurately a brain, body, and environment are a system. This approach is precisely what the coding metaphor forbids, is it cuts through the system and uncouples it. It's a dynamical system. This user-related dynamical system cognition, Gilder. But the specific point here is that not so much that cognition is dynamic, but rather that its neural basis is dynamical system and must be understood as such. It's a special kind of dynamical system, composed of units, which are also dynamical systems. This calls a role of spikes in the system to mediate conflict between the dynamical units. They are transient events that are better understood as actions rather than representations. A useful analogy might be the collective behavior of social insects are also dynamical systems coupled to each other by actions, and the collective behaviors they display be understood in terms of self-organization without resorting to the concept of coding. Bonobo. This view should not be mistaken for an argument against representations in general, but more precisely against the classic view of representations and coding. Bickert has made a case for representations of normativity realized by anticipatory properties of internal processes. In terms of neural modeling, this requires considering sensory motor systems. The necessity of this level of analysis has been stressed by a number of authors, developed alternatives in cognition. Yeah, Gibson and others. Paradoxically, it's customary in systems of neuroscience to model perceptual abilities by considering only the corresponding sensory areas. We speak, for example, of visual systems as a set of anatomical structures from the eye to the visual cortex. The visual system divided in this way is not an actual system disconnected from the elements without which it cannot have any function. It follows that models of perceptual systems are, in fact, not biological models, but chimeras obtained by attaching a neural model of sensory area to an abstract construct decoder that maps activity of neurons to descriptors of behavior and often even maps a more problematic abstract construct decoder that maps stimulus parameters to model inputs. This methodology embraces both behaviorism, neural activity as a response to stimuli, only responses to stimuli, and dualism, something else makes sense of neural activity. Instead, I suggest developing models of the full sensory motor loop, models that behave. For example, instead of looking for neural codes of sound location, one could look for neural models of auditory orientation reflexes. Measurements of neural activity in stimulus response experiments can be constrained and used to constrain and test such models, but they do not need to be output of the model, nor do they need to be causal variable in the model. To be clear, the issue is not about the amount of detail, which that reminds me of some things mentioned in CBMM and the kind of theories of learning and learning need in sort of a positive sense. Models can be simplified or idealized as any model needs to be. The issue is to respect the causal structure of the brain and behavior and to see neuronal activity as what it really is, activity. There we go. Action potentials are potentials that produce actions. They're not hieroglyphs to be deciphered. Interesting. Strong
statement.
An argument that was putting it out there. Like that. We're out of time, but we'll continue this next time, definitely. But I don't know what I did, but okay, open up your other here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about this more next time.
Anything you want to say before we go, just to capture this up?
Oh, this paper also looked cool. It was one that was cited.
Any other comments before we head out? Or kind of just teaser. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Definitely putting on myself to talk about my paper this weekend for ISPSM. I really want to, on personal note to myself, to go back. There are a bunch of paper ideas we came up with, like ideas, things I'd like to talk about, including Bradley mentioned talking about neurocoding in more detail. A lot of talk about beyond coding scientific revolutions. A lot of talk about data and stuff too. So very exciting. I should go through this and pick out things to do and like an action list from this. But I'll leave it at that, and hopefully see you guys tomorrow for our 11 talk, and then this weekend.
Yeah, tomorrow.
All right, take care. Bye.